They're under environmental, social, and governance, an ESG umbrella, to something more fundamental than that. And that's what we're going to be talking about today with Scott Stonham, the founder of Well, That's Interesting Tech. Scott, so welcome. And but by way of introduction, I thought it would also be good to start talking about your own journey to this point, because it forms such an interesting sort of discussion point in itself around the world of work.
Brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much, Duncan, for the nice intro. Thank you for having me on. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. So, yeah, my journey to this point has really been, I say it's like an 8-year eureka moment, a very slow aha. I've spent the last 25 years or so doing being at the forefront of technology innovation, one way or another. In my early career, I was really lucky to be involved in some really transformative things, like the development of mobile internet with Vodafone, and the creation of what's now the smartphone sat-nav market with Qualcomm. And then, I was young, successful, got carried away with kind of job titles and kind of good pay and stuff like that, and it was great for a while. And then there was this kind of nagging feeling that was, something's not quite right. And it took about 8 years for me to find that opportunity to really dig into what that nagging feeling was, and then do something about it. So roll forward plenty of years. In 2019, I had that opportunity, and I launched Well, That's Interesting Tech, and it was really the long-term vision of it wasn't really concrete. It was something I knew I had to go in a direction, and I knew I had to start. And I think actually, as we go through today's conversation, that will be a bit of a theme. You have to do something, so just get doing something which feels right. So I started Well, That's Interesting Tech with the idea of finding those technologies that were doing good in the world. So that's kind of how it all started, and it's morphed now to be much more focused and aligned with still technologies are doing good, but aligns to the UN SDGs in one way or another.
Yes, and it's interesting looking at your sort of bio. Is it, in a different world in the past, you might have gone from the career you described into being, say, a technology writer, an analyst, and you sort of pigeonhole yourself into the next thing. But what you've done is sort of find your own voice, which is so powerful.
Yeah. And actually, it's funny, as when I was a child and going through my GCSEs and my A-levels and stuff like that, writing was never anything I wanted to do. And so it's kind of funny looking back now and thinking, okay, well, I effectively write for a living. It's a bit more than that, of course, but
yes,
it was a bit of a surprise to me to realize, oh, I'm a writer, and somebody described me as a journalist. I'm like, again, surprise.
Yes. Yeah, so we might come back to some of those sorts of thoughts about just about work, because there's some other interesting sort of topics just around that. But let's just jump in with the first question then, and ask, well, so what does sustainability mean to you? Because it's just fascinating to me how we've gone from, like I said, to this sort of ESG sort of idea to something that's completely fundamental to living and working.
That's a huge question. So let's see, how long do we have? Sustainability is a very powerful word, but it's also, as you know, it's being used in so many good ways and so many kind of nefarious ways as well at the moment. So what does it mean to me is it may be different what it means to you and to many others. For me, it's about making decisions and doing things that are going to make our lives and our world better in the long term, with a more near-term view of, if I don't do these things now, then the things I'm trying to do will become harder and harder and maybe even impossible. So it's kind of a near-term view for me. So for one example, I now run my whole office setup from a battery power pack behind me, run by a single solar panel. And for me, that kind of gives me a power budget. I'm working in my office, I can see how much power I've got left in the battery. And if that means I need to maybe switch from my big screen to my small screen to make it through the day in that power budget, that's me thinking I'm not putting any more demand on the household energy supply or anything like that. But in the near term, I'm thinking, as I said before, having moved back to the UK recently, there's an energy bill coming up at some point. And if I can use as much as I can from the sun, then I'm going to do that. So it's kind of that long-term, but also near-term thinking for me to make things better and more sustainable and kind of ongoing.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Why do you think it is then that the awareness of sustainability has just gone up so much recently. We seem to have just gone on this journey, and now it's becoming a complete sort of industry, if you like. There's people who do the finance, the analysis, and the technology all around it, all around sustainability, rather than it just being. Yeah, even quite recently, it was something that was maybe for companies and the whole world, really, something a little bit off to the side, where we try to do recycling and what have you.
Hmm. Hmm. It's a really good point, really interesting observation, and one that I've mulled over the last year or so. I definitely have seen let's call it a rapid uptake and in awareness on the sustainability topics and on the awareness of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It's interesting, ESG has been around, I think, for 25 years. So many of these things are not new. It's just
Yeah.
been taking a while to come forward. I know some of my colleagues in this space, they've been working in sustainability for 25 years. And it's kind of interesting to see that, yeah, it's been around a long time, but why now? My personal kind of take on this, and it evolves around raised awareness of the UN SDGs. When I first started this around 2019, early 2020 with the SDGs, I had to explain what they were to everybody in every conversation I had. And you could argue that, now the reason that I don't have to do that is because I'm now in my own filter bubble with people who know what they are, so it makes more sense. But it's not just that. Going outside my filter bubble, I see people are more aware of it. So I started to question why. And I think in 2020, we had the kind of confluence of two major global events. We had the pandemic and we had COP26. And here in the UK, as we had everything that went around that as well. And these two things for me made it kind of two areas of the SDGs stand out very clearly for everybody kind of around here. So you've got SDG 3, which is focused on good health and well-being. Well, hello, that's COVID and the pandemic. So suddenly that became really personal, but at the same time, a global thing. So, okay, this is a global issue. And then we've got COP26, which clearly fits within number 13, climate change. So I kind of think these two things pulled awareness together in a batch of two. And then again, as I start speaking to people about this, you go, well, actually, number one, poverty. Number two, hunger. Well, you don't really have too much poverty or hunger in the UK, do we? And actually, we do. We do. And when you start looking for it, you realize that Jack down the street is really struggling. You realize that so many more people are turning to food banks now with the energy crisis as well. So many more people are going to energy poverty and actual poverty. So I think there's been these global events which have really kind of drawn people towards this. And if I may, I've got one other anecdote to do with my mum, actually. So for years, I've been talking to her about sustainability and these things, and she kind of listens to me, but doesn't really acknowledge it. That kind of, yeah, got it, okay. And I was telling her about water scarcity in the UK, that 46% in 2020, 46% of the UK's population live in areas designated as water scarce. So not enough water to do the things you need. And she kind of, yeah, and carried on watering her garden. And then this year, she was telling me how she hasn't had rain and how the garden is brown and dry. And she goes, this is what you were talking about. I'm like, yeah, this is what I was talking about. So I think there's also this now first-hand realization, which makes it so much more personal and relatable for people. So in a nutshell, that was my ramble as to why I think it's kind of grown in awareness.
Yes, when you look at those goals, when I take a look at them, I think, well, that's how you could describe this country, or in fact any countries. You move away from this idea of, I guess, having sort of wealthier countries and less well-off countries, and helping less well-off countries, to just thinking a bit beyond that to the whole world, and like you say, possibly the people around you who you can probably help the most. And it's great to see those sort of shifts in thinking to a much sort of broader mindset.
Yeah, and I think, so we talked about the personal realization, but at the same time, you had Larry Fink from BlackRock put out his $130 trillion megatrend statement. And I think that made businesses and financial institutions pay attention a lot more than they had done before. So there's definitely these macro drivers like that. And I think I wrote about that in 2019 as well. For the system to change, the system has to change, and the system will change through financial incentive. And then Larry Fink on prompt came out and did that. So that was coincidental.
Yeah. And also related to that, an article you wrote recently about this term, the Great Resignation, which you can end up sort of getting stuck on some of the terms. But it's very what I really enjoyed about reading it, and with sustainability as well. It's not we're moving away from there being kind of right and wrong answers to everything, and it being a bit sort of black and white. We can do something that's much more nuanced than that, and requires much more subtle approaches to building solutions, rather than in the past we probably a bit more looking for kind of the right answer and then moving forward on that basis.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think that tallies with one of my observations in interviewing lots of these technology leaders, or leaders using technology. That's probably the best way of doing it.
Yeah.
Leaders using technology to do good. What I've discovered is, these highly driven individuals have normally had some kind of personal moment or tragedy or some kind of event that's made them decide, what I'm going to do? I'm going to just focus on this one issue, this one cause. Like the guy who decided to really focus all of his time, money, and effort on preventing wildfires was because he experienced one firsthand. Another chap was building a new way of funding clinical research into underrepresented areas because his child was suffering badly and Big Pharma was doing nothing. So it's these personal moments that drive that kind of purposefulness within an organization. And then when he finds that purpose, that becomes kind of passion. And when you get that passion, that becomes contagious, and the whole kind of organization kind of gets along and gets on board. And that kind of fits within the Great Resignation piece, because people are saying, I need something more. I need something more to attach myself to. I'm giving away half my life to work, so it needs to be something more. And in that article, we're talking about this moment of leverage, collective human leverage. And it's not just one employee, but it's all of them saying, hey, I want more. So employers have to listen to that. But because it comes from this kind of point of a personal event or a personal feeling, it's no longer, like you said, it's no longer just a yes or a no or a black or a white or whatever. It's maybe thousands of employees who all have their own personal reasons for demanding more or something different. So it is a lot, by nature, it's a blended kind of view on what's right and what's wrong. And that gives employers huge challenges, but huge opportunities as well. And that's something that I've been exploring with a few companies recently too.
Just to sort of go into that a little bit more detail, it was really interesting when you were talking about just the notion that there's people out there, and it's not necessarily for maybe any one specific reason, but for example, they're not able to produce a CV. And actually, as you were saying before, but not being a writer when you're younger, but maybe having a CV in the past, that was a sort of proof that you're a sort of fine, upstanding citizen or what have you. And now, but if you're not in a position to be able to put together a CV, that doesn't necessarily mean you're not valuable in the workplace. And I was also have a conversation with another friend of mine, and he was talking as well at that sort of executive side of things, that actually lots of people don't use LinkedIn. So there's no reason why the only way to sort of find work is necessarily by having a fantastic LinkedIn profile. It can be good, but it's not necessarily exclusive, and it means there's many opportunities out there that you can discover without using LinkedIn, without having a CV. And the idea that there's companies out there looking for solutions to those sorts of problems, technology solutions, I think is really interesting. And it's also interesting how can a company shift its mindset from just that traditional way of reaching out to recruiters and finding CVs and what have you. How can you think differently about finding people out there?
Yeah, and I agree. This is, on one hand, COVID presented a very significant opportunity to change that. I was one of the first people in the Vodafone office that I was in to work remotely, and that was back in '99, I think. So I've been working remotely for quite a while, but suddenly so many more people found themselves having to try and work remotely. And that changed how companies thought about their teams, their policies, their hiring practices and stuff. And at that time, I was engaged in a project to do with decentralized workforces and distributed organizations, not in the sense of crypto, like DAOs or anything like that, but distributed organizations. And we really saw it as an opportunity to how do you reach those people who would not have even bothered to submit a an application because they live 3,000 miles away,
Yes.
or they may only live 2 miles away, but they have a physical restriction, which means that they can't get in there, or some kind of other commitment that they can't. So there is this great opportunity to diversify the workforce in every possible direction if you don't have to think that that person has to get into the office. And some organizations are still embracing that, but there's now this kind of rush to get people back to offices, I think, as we see with Apple right now, and the pressure they're under there. So there's that. So I think that's really interesting. But then the other thing is, how do you engage with what's called the hidden workforce? So those people that could do the job, but don't even want to know about it, don't have the confidence to go through the application process, don't have the skills to do the application, all of those things that you mentioned. And there are, I wrote about one, as you mentioned, but there's others out there as well who are trying to turn that on its head to say, look, I want to know whether you can actually do the job, not tell me that you can do the job. So here, give it a go, try it out, see if you can do it, which is good for me, the employer, but also for you, try it out, because I don't want you to join us to hire you, go all through that rigmarole onboarding you, and 2 weeks later you leave because actually it's not what you thought it was. So I think there's benefits in both sides of trying to close that gap and do things differently.
Yes, at the moment I'm working on some projects. One of which is to buy an HR system. There's because of the circumstances of the company, it needs a new HR system, and then there's also challenges in other departments that are a little bit paper oriented, where they're struggling to recruit because the recruitment you really have to go into the office because that's where the paper is, and so we're looking at joining those things up, if you like. So if we can reduce the amount of paper involved in certain processes and do those things electronically, it'll then actually mean it's not just for again, in the past you'd probably be wanting to do that for just the technology reason almost. Now it's the reason is so you can actually hire people in that department who as you say, live thousands of miles away. At the moment, that's they actually have to go to the office because otherwise you literally wouldn't be able to do the job because of the way the department works. So it's sort of connecting those two things. But and as you mentioned before, though, these things, it's very, very difficult to move things forward because on the one hand, you need to just implement an HR system. But when you look at this, the really fundamental issues to do with the sustainability of an organization, suddenly you're kind of blowing it wide open a little bit, and then you can end up not achieving, not being successful and delivering any kind of outcome at all because the thing suddenly is too big. I mean, so what are your thoughts about that? How do you can kind of keep the topic of sustainability grounded in something that is achievable?
Yeah, and how do you get everybody to be involved and all of these questions as well? So, sustainability needs to be for it to succeed anyway. It needs to be sustainable itself. So it needs to have its own business case, if you like. And that can sometimes get a little bit controversial because we're basically most of the time talking about adding a ROI onto your sustainability plan. But I think at a higher level, I'll come back to your question in a minute, just to set the scene. I think at a higher level, on one hand, I see technology as one of the prime reasons that we're in this mess today. So whether you go back from how humans tamed fire all the way through to the agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, and the information age, that our incessant, relentless obsession with technology has led us to the situation we are today. And I think on one hand, that's got us there, but I am a firm believer that technology used with constraint and wisdom can actually be a huge power of good in this world. The same thing can be said with capitalism and the way our businesses and our societies work around money. It's created so many problems. But I think, again, to kind of throw the controversy flag out there, I think that it has to be used and engaged. That engine has to be engaged in the same way to make the change that we need. So we have to kind of create the business model around sustainability so that the system that we live in can make it prosper and survive. So kind of that's what we need to think about when we're doing sustainability work, is how do we make sure that it isn't just a sink of cash and energy, it actually has some
Yeah.
positive return. And I was listening to an investor yesterday who was saying basically, all investment now is impact investing, because
Right.
if you're not thinking about the impact, then your investment is going to decline anyway. So everything is impact investing. So everything we do has to be looked at through a sustainability lens today anyway, because otherwise, what's the point? It's just not going to exist. And that's either from the point of view of sustaining your business, or from like an environmental sustainability and a community sustainability point of view. Either way, we need to do that. So your question is, how do you not bite off too much that you can chew? And how do you kind of make sure that you can keep doing your day job? There's some quick, simple things you can do to get things rolling. And I think as you get things rolling and people get kind of into that mindset and into that thinking, it grows organically. And that's another thing you need to be careful of, because you need to make sure you're in control to some degree, so it doesn't go completely tangents, or worse, conflict each other. That's another thing you've got to watch out for. You can highly
Yeah.
optimize for one thing at the cost of another. So I think for organizations that are still young in this journey, there are small things you can do. And I've been working with a few to, as an example, when somebody submits a website contact form, get in touch with us type thing, you can do something small but impactful for a community or for people or for environmental projects somewhere in the world. Within my business, I've done quite a lot of that. So you sign up for a newsletter, I sponsor a tree to be grown on your behalf. Not just plant a tree, sponsor a tree. And then I do other things, like if you book a meeting with me on Calendly, I sponsor access to water for a family in Vietnam and Kenya for a day. And I've sponsored years of this stuff. So that's a way that businesses can get going really simply and easily. And the great thing about that, I think, is you can align them to the SDGs, which means that you can go to your team and you can say, right, team, what causes do you feel most passionate about? Great. These are the ones we will support with you in our process of doing business. Now, there's some really simple, small things that can be done at a relatively low cost and don't cost a business a huge amount of money, but will scale with business success. So it kind of has its own return on investment there. There are bigger things you can do. I mean, your challenge of an HR system, choosing the right one so you don't blow everything up, that's kind of like a open heart surgery kind of thing for you. And that's, you got to go through your own due diligence with that. But it's important, I think, before you start that assessment process, to make sure that you understand what sustainability criteria you have and put that into your buying process as well. Yes. Because it's that conversation with suppliers that changes things. So if you've got 5 potential suppliers and you all ask them, okay, what are your sustainability credentials? What's your supply chain like? And ask them these difficult questions, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, all of these things. Then if they don't already focus on that, you're not going to be the only person asking them. So as they start hearing it more and more, they're going to change. But then it also makes your job of choosing the one that fits a bit easier. You might find that actually somebody's really sustainable, but got a terrible product, and that's a completely different problem.
Yeah, fascinating. And going back to what you were talking about at the start, then it's about companies thinking about, rather than possibly in the past they'll have donated profits to charity, sort of thing. That we donate a certain percentage of a charity, to actually being a little bit more proactive about that from a sustainability point of view, in terms of doing good for the world.
Yeah, you could be proactive and nuanced all at the same time, which, I think this is a really good way of engaging employees easily within that kind of purpose of the business.
Yeah.
Without it having to be just a chunk of revenue. I've worked in companies where they said that we would have a day of our time a year could be spent on voluntary activities.
Yes.
And nobody cared about it until it had to be reported on a quarterly basis. And then at the end of the quarter, the managers would run around and say, have you done it? Have you done it? Have you done it? And everybody said, no, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. So it never got done, and it never became part of business. It always became an afterthought and kind of an overhead and a frustration. And actually, I'm trying to close a project, and now you're telling me to go and spend a day in a shop. It was never integrated. But these kind of simple things you can do, if you integrate them, then it just becomes part of business as usual. But with visibility, with impact, and you can collect them all up and count them all up, and you can report on them. It becomes a really powerful thing for the communities and projects you're supporting, but also for your customers, your employees, your partners, your entire stakeholder group. Or as now I think they're calling it, interested parties, not stakeholders.
Okay. And is there anything else that businesses can do? Because when you look at there's so many technology solutions out there, I guess there is a risk that your sort of technology sort of estate can become sort of quite fragmented, as for many organisations it has done in the past. You end up with lots of things scattered around doing bits and pieces, and actually that becomes quite onerous to manage rather than really achieving the sort of simplicity, which is what I spend my days doing.
I had a conversation yesterday about this,
Okay.
about simplicity, and I was talking to this chap I've spoken to quite a few times after he'd given a presentation, how he had taken this roadmap of 63 things and simplified it down to 5 key actions. And I said, I totally see where your skill set is now. I can't do that. That focus into simplicity is absolutely astonishing. And yeah, so this is the challenge when you have IT estates, which nearly always have grown kind of all through osmosis or something
Yes.
like that, or through acquisition or whatever. How do you keep an eye on all of those things? How do you kind of consolidate them and make sure they're working as you expect them to do? I mean, that's not my skill set. That's your skill set. I don't know how you do that, but I can tell you why it's important.
Yes.
From a sustainability point of view. We're touching now on this area that I've been quite involved in this year. It's called digital carbon footprints, and we've kind of slipped into this idea that digital business is, if not insignificant from a carbon footprint, kind of maybe even carbon free, and it's not.
Yeah.
It's totally not. But we kind of treat it like it is. So I've been working a lot on kind of trying to raise that discussion so that we don't compound our behaviors that we have nowadays, which we've grown up with for over 20 years, or we've had instilled on us over the last 2. Things like just leaving things on standby. My nan used to have a go at me for that when she only had one little red LED on one TV in one room. And I remember as a kid just kind of rolling my eyes and scoffing. But nowadays, how many things do you have on in your house? How many things do you have on your office that are just sitting there doing nothing, adding no value, doing nothing other than chewing away at electricity? Now, that's true for stuff that you've got on your desk. It's true for stuff that you've got in the cloud, and even stuff that you think isn't doing things like backups and data.
Yeah.
If that's sitting somewhere in the cloud, it's consuming energy and storage. It's consuming hardware that has a carbon footprint as well. So as part of this digital carbon footprint work, it's really a case of looking at those different areas from procurement through IT on premises, and that includes things like printers and screens and laptops and cables as well. How do you get a better idea of what kind of carbon footprint these have? And also working from home. That's another really interesting one. If you think about remote workers from a greenhouse gas protocol point of view, a GHG protocol point of view, that's scope 3. So just because one of your employees is working from home doesn't mean that their carbon emissions are their problem. It means it's your problem because they're part of your organization. So you need to understand how much they're using, how much they're wasting, and even in some cases, whether they're on renewable energy sources or not. And that gets a bit tricky. But this is kind of that extended, blurry boundary, fuzzy boundary, if you like, of business in the modern world, because it's not just their electricity, their carbon footprint, but another point that we haven't touched today is mental health. That's also your responsibility. They're your employee all of this time as well. So it's a really interesting area. All of these things just sitting around doing nothing not only are a waste of resource in terms of maybe services or hardware you're paying for, it's being underutilized, but it's got a carbon footprint that you don't even realize. And in our world where energy prices are going up like crazy, I think we should all be worried. If it's not for the carbon footprint, which I'm hoping it will be, it should be about managing your energy bills as well. So we can pull these things together. It could be a really powerful moment in history.
Yes, and could help bring together organizations around these objectives, I guess. So when we're rolling out cloud-based systems, whilst we're doing the work, we could actually say, well, actually, let's talk about the sustainability, the environmental footprint, what have you, and look and see if we can get excited about the fact that we can do what we can to save electricity. So rather than just using it like kind of say Instagram, as it were, and watching videos in Instagram and consuming electricity that way, how can we be effective as an organization and save money in the use of our cloud services? Because I guess you do, at least with those cloud-based services, you do get the bill, a bit like your home electricity bill. There, the bill does land, and it'll reflect the number of video calls you've had and everything.
Yeah, a video. I mean, this is another interesting thing. I wrote the paper I wrote, Exploring Digital Carbon Footprints, was 60 pages long, so there's quite a lot in there. There's some really kind of interesting kind of nuances through it as well. The cloud providers, they all have their own sustainability reporting dashboards as well, which you probably don't know about. But Microsoft Azure has one, Google has one, Cisco has one, Salesforce. You can go and see how much carbon all of your services through those platforms are generating. There's a challenge with all of them. They're not complete, and that's this world of sustainability. It's incremental at the moment. We don't know everything. We don't know all the things that we don't know, but we need to move forward. Like I said earlier on, we need to do something to move forward in the right direction and not be afraid of that uncertainty, which is easy to say in a business, much harder to achieve. But we have to, because otherwise we'll sit around and do nothing, which will not be good. The challenge with that is on many of those dashboards that you see, they will talk about energy usage, which is absolutely fine and important. But actually, if you think of a lifetime carbon footprint of a thing, a laptop or a hard disk or a server rack or something like that, 80% of its lifetime carbon footprint is in what's called the embodied carbon. So the carbon that is generated when that thing was made, shipped, stored, and manufactured. So when you look at your carbon dashboard from, I don't know, Microsoft or Google, I'm not sure which one you want to have a look at, you need to make sure that it includes that as well. And if it doesn't, we need more voices going to these suppliers saying, we need to know what you're doing there. And once we tackled that, we need to know things like, what's your water consumption like? How much water are you wasting? What's your land usage like as well? Because these are big questions that these big technology players really have to answer more quickly as well.
I see. So bringing it all together then, what would your advice be to say someone like myself working in digital transformation within a business to help from the point of view of delivering the technology, but also the people side to it as well? As you say, you touched on the sort of the mental health side of things, and then sort of broadly really about sort of people in the workplace and then use of technology.
Yeah, good question. So I think we need to first of all make sure that we're comfortable, as I said, moving forward, even though we don't know everything, but understand that everything is interdependent somehow. And that's why I love the SDGs as well. It's like a spider's web. If you pull one of them, you tug on the other one way or another. Yeah. But also at the same time as well, understanding that, not kind of get caught in that infinite cycle of, well, I can't do this without that. We need to make a step forward. And the easiest way, I think, to do that is to create a baseline of our understanding and of our impact. And that can be very simple to start with, but the business needs to commit to reviewing that and improving it and kind of improving the target setting along it. And once you have that baseline, every business decision needs to be marked against that baseline. So, for example, at a very simple level, we could be talking about energy performance of devices. So that could be one thing. You could have a commitment that for your devices, I don't know, let's say a screen that's sitting in front of me, screens need to conform to a certain power range. And when you're choosing two different screens, actually this one's over the baseline and this one's under. So I'm going to go for the under the baseline. Very simple to say, but you can then extend that everywhere else as well. So when you're looking at purchasing new equipment, you can be thinking about, well, okay, if I purchase something brand new, it's got this carbon footprint, and that information is becoming easier to get as well. But if I purchase this remanufactured thing that has the same 5 or 10 year warranty and guarantee with it, then my carbon footprint is a fraction, 10% of the new one. Now, if you take that company baseline, it means, well, I'm going to buy 10 of those, and that sends us much closer towards our target than buying 10 brand new. So I think baselines are important. Make sure they become part of everyday decision making, and make sure they're reviewed on a regular basis as well. On the human side of things, there was a really interesting video from Gartner, which really highlighted the fact that this whole Great Resignation piece has transformed thinking in businesses away from human resource back to human being. So I think culturally, we need to try and bring that being piece back into our conversations about the people we work with. We're not just resources. They're not just resources. It can be swapped out like memory in a computer. They're human beings with their own needs, desires, passions, challenges. So it adds complexity to a business to start with, but over time, the more you embrace people as people, the closer your relationships and the more you get from them, which sounds complete, we're not doing it for that reason, but you want your people to be happy and productive. So you have to treat them like people and human beings rather than just a resource that you can get rid of. Again, every business, white collar, blue worker, whatever, it's going to be different, but we have to think that way. And I think by also thinking about, the SDGs, I'm not an SDG ambassador. I just think they really help. Thinking about them, you can have those conversations at a conceptual level to start with an organization and open the door that, okay, we are going to be looking for ways to help with well-being and good health through our focus on SDG 3 as an example. And you can encourage that kind of collective decision making and discussion around it, which makes the whole process a lot easier if you have the people. As if people are bought into it, it's a lot easier than trying to force something on them. But use that kind of experience of mine, which says, the personal experience drives the purpose, drives the passion, and that becomes contagious.
Well, that's a really great note to end on, I think. So I just want to say thanks very much, Scott, for joining us today. It's been a brilliant talk. And what's the best way of keeping in contact with you or for people to reach out to you?
2 ways. LinkedIn, so Scott Stonham, you should find me there. And also via my website, that'sinteresting.tech. So either of those, I'm very happy to chat with anyone who wants to talk about these topics.
All right. Well, thanks again then, Scott, and look forward to the next episode of the Making Things Work podcast next month. See you then.
Duncan, thank you so much. Bye-bye.